Assalamu alaikum. Today, the chapter of cell, the unit of life, we are going to discuss about active transport and sodium potassium pump, because sodium potassium pump is a type of active transport. And in this lecture, we will discuss about primary transport and primary active transport and what is secondary active transport. So, firstly, what is active transport? Active transport is, as you know, we already discussed in the last lecture that what is active transport. Active transport is the transfer of molecules from area of its low concentration to area of its high concentration through semi-permeable membrane. So here, for the process of active transport, energy in the form of ATP is very important. And second thing is that the carrier proteins like the transporter protein, and in case of sodium potassium pump, these carrier protein or transporter protein is called the protein pump, and protein pump is also very important. So third point is different pumps for different ions or substances, means for every pump, for each and every pump or for each and every ion, the pumps are different. For example, if there is a pump for sodium and potassium, then the pump lets the sodium potassium to come in and out. And if the pump is for only sodium, then the pump is called sodium pump, because this pump works only for sodium. If the pump is for potassium, then the pump works for only potassium, because the pump lets the potassium or ion come in or go out. So for protein pump consists of two subunits, like we already talked about that. In case of active transport, carrier protein or transporter protein is called the protein pump. So here the protein pump consists of two subunits. One is the smaller subunit and number two is the larger subunit. You already know that, because the protein are very important, and one is the smaller subunit and other is larger subunit. Next is, this is the mechanism of sodium potassium pump, because firstly we are going to discuss about sodium potassium pump, how sodium potassium pump works. So here this is the extracellular environment and this is the cytosol, means this environment is inside the cell and extracellular is outside the cell, and here the bilipid layer is present, and this is the sodium potassium pump. Why it is called sodium potassium pump? Because you can see here the sodium and potassium both are working, both are taking in or taking out. So this pump is for sodium or potassium, that's why this pump is called sodium potassium pump. Now in that case, in case of sodium potassium pump, because it is the part of the active transport, and here the molecules move from area of its low concentration to area of its high concentration. As you can see here, the 3 sodium and this is the sodium. So in usually sodium ion concentration is more outside the cell and sodium ion concentration is less inside the cell, and potassium ion concentration is more inside the cell and potassium ion concentration is less outside the cell. So here, according to the definition of active transport, molecules move from area of its low concentration to high concentration. So here you can see this arrow sign shows that sodium ions are moving from inside to outside. Inside concentration is less of sodium and outside concentration of sodium is more, and sodium ions are taking from inside to outside. And you can see here, because according to the sodium potassium pump, it is must that 3 sodium ions are taking out, then 2 potassium ions are taking in. It's not like that 2 potassium ion 2 sodium ion are taking out and 3 potassium ion are taking in. It's not like that. It is must. So it is must that according to sodium potassium pump, 3 sodium ions are taking out and 2 potassium ions are taking in. So because potassium ion concentration is less outside, so from outside 2 potassium ion are taking in, and outside sodium ion concentration is more, and inside sodium ion concentration is less, so from inside to outside 3 sodium ion are taking in. And this process takes place simultaneously, means when 2 potassium ions are taking out, then at the same time 3 sodium ions are coming inside. So this diagram explains the detail or step-by-step procedure of sodium potassium pump, how sodium potassium pump works. So this is the sodium potassium pump. So in the first step, as you can see here, the 3 sodium ion and 1 ATP binding to the pump. So here this pump is like this. This pump opens from the cytosol side. So here firstly the ATP is bind to the ATP binding site. Here the ATP binding site is present, so ATP binds to the ATP binding site, and after that there are 3 sites are available for sodium ions. So these 3 sites are occupied by sodium ions. After the binding of sodium ions, these sodium ions stimulate the hydrolysis of ATP. Means after sodium binding of sodium ions, these sodium ions stimulate the ATP to convert into the ADP. So here the ADP is formed. In the next step, pump phosphorylase changes conformation, expelling sodium. So after the conformation of ADP, the conformational change takes place in the structure of sodium potassium pump. So after, for in the first diagram you can see here the opening was towards the cytosol side, and after the formation of after the hydrolysis of ATP to ADP, only one phosphate group is attached. So after that the hydrolysis or conformation of sodium potassium pump has changed. Now this pump has opened from the outside extracellular side. So now in that manner, now there is a pathway for the release of sodium ions. So in that manner these sodium ions are released into the cytosol, and now here the 2 sides are available for the potassium ions. So this is side 1 and this is side 2. Here the 2 sides are available for potassium ions. So in the next step, 2 extracellular potassium binds to the pump, triggering the release of phosphate group. So here the 2 sides are available for the potassium ions. So here the one potassium ion binds, here the another potassium ions bind, and after that the binding of potassium ions stimulate or trigger the release of phosphate. So after that the phosphate is released, and again the conformation of sodium potassium pump has changed, and now again there is an opening towards the cytosol side. As you can see here, the opening is towards the cytosol side, and again in that manner the 2 potassium ions are released. So in the overall process, the process is very simple. Firstly, there is a sodium potassium pump. For the sodium potassium pump has 2 sides for potassium ions and 3 sides for sodium ion. And in the first step, firstly there is a ATP binding site is present. So ATP binds to the ATP binding site, and the 3 sodium ions bind to the active sites. And these sodium ions stimulate the conversion of ATP into ADP, as you can see in this step. And after that the conformational change takes place in the structure of sodium potassium pump, and because of that their opening is towards the extracellular side, and now 3 sodium ions are released, and now here the 2 active sites for so potassium ions are available. So these 2 active sites are occupied by potassium ion, and after the binding of immediately after the binding of potassium ions, now here the phosphate group released or is released, and now there again the conformational change in the structure of sodium potassium pump takes place, and now the opening is towards the cytosol side and 2 potassium ions are released. So this is the whole process for the sodium potassium pump. So there is another terminology, that is the secondary active transport. So according to the secondary active transport, but before coming to the secondary active transport, we must know about what is primary active transport. So in the sodium potassium pump, we already talked about the process, like in case of the sodium, because sodium potassium pump, the first step of sodium potassium pump we already discussed in the last slide, is the primary active transport. In case of primary active transport, ATP is involved and the molecules move from area of its low concentration to area of its high concentration. So at the end of the primary active transport, you can see that outside sodium ion concentration is more, and inside potassium ions concentration is more. So at the end of sodium potassium, primary active transport of sodium potassium pump, at the end sodium ion concentration is more outside the cell and potassium ion concentration is more inside the cell. So you know sodium ions are very important. So now there is a process of secondary active transport. So according to the secondary active transport, there is a another pump is present which is called the sodium. So in case of the secondary active transport, now sodium ion concentration is more outside the cell and potassium ion concentration is more inside the cell. So now there is the process of secondary active transport. In case of secondary active transport, sodium glucose symport transporters are present. So in that case, along with one sodium ion, one glucose molecule, this diagram shows the glucose molecule. So along with one sodium ion, one glucose molecule is taken in. So in case of, as you can see, there is a difference between primary active transport and secondary active transport. First difference between primary active transport and secondary active transport. In primary active transport, 3 sodium ions are taken out and 2 potassium ions are taken in. Whereas in case of secondary active transport, one sodium ion along with one glucose molecule is taken in. So you can see here the binding site is present for sodium, and here the binding site is present for glucose molecule, and by the binding of these, there is these one sodium ion and one glucose molecule is taken in. So and the second difference is that in case of primary transport, ATP is involved, direct ATP molecule is involved. You can see here the ATP molecule is involved, whereas in case of secondary active transport, ATP molecule is directly not involved, because first secondary active transport takes place only after the primary active transport. So you can see here the involvement of ATP is not direct, ATP involvement is indirect. And third thing is that here in case of the active transport, the molecules move from area of its low concentration to high concentration, and in case of sodium potassium pump, though both sodium or potassium are involved in the primary active transport, whereas in case of secondary active transport, only sodium is involved, and because sodium cannot come alone inside the cell, so sodium brings the glucose molecule with itself. So this diagram shows the pathway of molecules, because the molecules come in and outside through 3 pathways. So there is a pathway that is uniport, symport or antiport. So in case of uniport, only one molecule is involved, like only if we talk about only sodium pump, then only the sodium molecule is taken in, then in that case there is a uniport. In uniport, only one molecule is involved, only one molecule is taken in or one molecule is taken out. So uni means one. Whereas in case of symport, as you can see in the diagrams, 2 molecules are involved and both the molecules are taken in either or taken out. Or for example, if we talk about, this is sodium and this is glucose. So secondary active transport is actually the symport pathway, because in that case both the molecules are taken in and out in the same direction. Because in secondary transport, one molecule of sodium brings the glucose molecule along. So here sodium molecule brings the glucose inside the cell, and in the same way sodium and glucose go outside the cell. So if the only 2 molecules move in the same direction, then it is called the symport, and if only one molecule is involved, then it is called the uniport. But in case of the antiport, as you can see, anti means against, and in case of antiport transport, one molecule is taken in or one molecule is taken out, or vice versa. As in case of primary active transport, if we talk about sodium and potassium pump, in case of sodium and potassium, 2 potassium ions are taken in and 3 sodium ions are taken out. So you can see in the diagram, molecules are moving in the opposite direction. If one molecule is coming in, then the other molecule is going out, or other molecule is going in, other molecule is first one molecule is going out. So in case of uniport, the only one molecule is involved. To summarize it, if in case of uniport, only one molecule is involved. As you can see here, only one molecule is involved, and the one molecule is represented by pink color, whereas in symport two molecules are involved and both the molecules are moving in the same direction, either inside or outside. Whereas in case of antiport, again two molecules are involved and the both molecules are moving in the opposite direction. If one molecule is taken in, the another molecule is taken out. So these are the three transport mechanism. And in case of active transport, secondary pathway is the symport, and the primary active transport works as the antiport pathway. So this is for the today's lecture. Thank you.